If you follow the NFL, even casually, stop what you're doing right now, because what is unfolding around Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns could be the most consequential trade story of this entire era of professional football. This is not speculation for the sake of clicks. Multiple credible reports are circulating throughout league circles indicating that serious contenders are actively monitoring Garrett's availability. And when you understand who this man is, what he does on a football field, and what adding him to a championship-caliber roster would actually mean, the magnitude of this story becomes impossible to overstate. So let us break all of it down, from the player himself to the Browns' impossible decision, to the teams that stand to benefit most, and ultimately to what a Myles Garrett trade would mean for the entire competitive landscape of the NFL. To truly appreciate why this conversation is happening, you first have to understand what Myles Garrett represents as a football player, because words like elite and dominant get thrown around so casually in sports media that they have almost lost their meaning. But in Garrett's case, those words are not just appropriate, they are insufficient. What Garrett is, at his absolute core, is a generational pass rusher. And that is a designation that belongs to an extraordinarily small group of players across the entire history of professional football. We're talking about a tier occupied by Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White, Dwight Freeney, Derek Thomas. Players who did not just play the edge rusher position, but redefined what it was possible for a human being to do from that alignment. Garrett belongs in that conversation, and the fact that he is playing right now, in the prime of his career, makes this moment genuinely historic. He entered the league as the first overall pick in the 2017 NFL Draft out of Texas A&M, and unlike many top picks who require years of adjustment before they reach their ceiling, Garrett was disruptive almost immediately. The athleticism was undeniable from the start. At 6 feet 4 inches and over 270 pounds, he moved with a fluidity and explosiveness that offensive linemen simply were not built to contain one-on-one. But what separated Garrett from other physically gifted pass rushers was the speed at which he developed a complete technical arsenal to complement his natural tools. That combination of elite athleticism and refined pass rush craft is what makes him so uniquely dangerous, and it is what has allowed him to sustain elite production across multiple seasons rather than flashing briefly and fading. His career sack totals speak for themselves, but raw sack numbers do not fully capture the scope of his impact. Garrett is also one of the most productive players in the league in terms of quarterback pressures, hurries, quarterback hits, tackles for loss, and forced fumbles. He does not just get home on clean one-on-one rushes. He collapses the pocket even when he does not finish the play. He forces quarterbacks to step up, to throw early, to abandon their first read, to make decisions under duress that they would not have to make against lesser competition. That cognitive disruption is just as valuable as the sack itself, and it is something that shows up in the film far more than it shows up in a box score. The capstone recognition of his dominance came when he was named the NFL Defensive Player of the Year, one of the most prestigious individual awards in professional football. That award is not handed out based on reputation or prior accomplishments. It is a direct reflection of performance during a specific season, and the standard required to claim it is nothing short of being the most impactful defensive player in a league that employs thousands of professional athletes. Garrett met that standard. And what is perhaps most remarkable is that he met it while playing on a team that spent much of that season managing uncertainty at the most important position on the offense. He did not have the benefit of playing in a system optimized to highlight his talents, surrounded by complementary playmakers and scheme advantages. He earned that award by being so overwhelmingly good that the football world had no choice but to acknowledge it. What makes Garrett's pass rush so difficult to defend against is the sheer variety of ways he can win. Speed to power is the foundation. He can threaten the edge with a first step that fires out of his stance before most offensive tackles have fully processed the snap, and then convert that momentum into a bull rush if he does not win cleanly around the corner. He has a devastating spin move that allows him to reverse field direction in a space that offensive linemen cannot react to in real time. His rip and swim moves are polished to the point where they look effortless on tape, creating inside leverage that bypasses the blocker's frame entirely. And when he senses a lineman overcommitting to one counter, he is disciplined enough to set it up and attack in the opposite direction. That is not just athleticism. That is football intelligence. And it is what separates truly elite pass rushers from players who are merely very good. Now, with that foundation established, the question becomes, why is a player of this magnitude potentially available? And the answer is rooted in the difficult reality of where the Cleveland Browns franchise currently finds itself. The Browns made a monumental commitment several years ago when they traded for Deshaun Watson and signed him to one of the most lucrative contracts in NFL history. That decision was made with the belief that Watson represented the franchise quarterback answer that Cleveland had been searching for across decades of futility. The results on the field have not vindicated that belief. Whether due to Watson's extended suspension, his play upon returning, or the structural challenges of building an offense around a quarterback under that kind of scrutiny and pressure, the Browns have not developed into a legitimate Super Bowl contender. And the gap between where they are and where a team like that needs to be in order to compete for a championship is not a small one. When an organization reaches a point of honest self-assessment and concludes that the current construction of the roster is unlikely to produce a championship in the near term, the next question is always the same. What is the most responsible and productive thing to do with your most valuable assets? And in Cleveland's case, that question has a very clear answer. Myles Garrett is without question the most valuable trade chip the Browns possess. He is arguably one of the most valuable trade chips anywhere in the NFL. The combination of his age, his proven production, his remaining contract, and his position scarcity makes him a commodity that contending teams would line up to acquire. The Browns are facing one of the most delicate decisions a franchise can confront. Trading your best player is never easy, even when the logic is sound. It carries psychological weight in the locker room, sends a message to the fan base, and requires an enormous amount of trust in the front office's ability to translate the acquired assets into future wins. But holding on to Garrett while the team continues to struggle risks something arguably worse, wasting the prime years of a generational talent, years that can never be recovered. Garrett has made no secret of the fact that he wants to compete for a Super Bowl. That desire is entirely reasonable for a player of his caliber. And if the Browns are not in a position to provide that opportunity, the question of whether they owe it to him and to themselves to find a destination that can become very real and very pressing. If a trade does happen, the price will be significant. There is no scenario in which a player of Garrett's caliber moves from one team to another at a discount. The baseline expectation in any serious negotiation would begin at multiple first-round draft picks, and the final package would likely include additional selections or established players to bridge any gap in perceived value. For teams operating under that kind of draft capital expenditure, the calculation has to shift entirely away from long-term building and toward an honest reckoning with the present. If your roster is already constructed at a level where adding one elite player pushes you into legitimate championship contention, then future draft picks carry significantly less value than the opportunity you have right now. First-round picks are valuable in theory, but they are also uncertain. Some of them become franchise cornerstones. Many of them do not. A sure thing at one of the most impactful positions in football is worth more than a projection and a hope. The teams most likely to enter serious conversations about a Garrett trade share a common profile. They have a proven quarterback, they have strong offensive infrastructure, and they have identified their defensive pass rush as the critical missing component standing between them and a championship. The Buffalo Bills represent, perhaps, the most compelling hypothetical destination. Josh Allen is operating at a level that very few quarterbacks in the history of the game have reached, and the Bills have assembled a roster around him that is capable of competing with anyone. But they have encountered the ceiling of what that roster can accomplish without a truly elite defensive disruptor. Adding Garrett to a defense that already has capable pieces would not just improve the unit incrementally. It would transform it. The Bills would go from a team that opposing offenses game plan around to a team that opposing offenses cannot prepare for, because no game plan accounts for a player who simply wins individual matchups at the rate Garrett does. The Dallas Cowboys represent another fascinating possibility. The Cowboys have long positioned themselves as a franchise with championship aspirations, and their offensive talent base, led by C.D. Lamb, has consistently ranked among the best in the NFC. Their defensive line has produced pass rush production at various points, but the presence of a player who can single-handedly alter a game's trajectory at the most critical moments is something they have never truly had. Garrett would provide that. He would give Dallas a player who opposing coordinators have to account for on every single snap, a player who makes the entire defense more unpredictable and more dangerous in the moments when games are decided. The Philadelphia Eagles are another organization that consistently builds with the intention of competing for Super Bowls, and their approach to roster construction typically involves adding dominant players at key positions before the competition does. The Eagles have proven willing to make aggressive moves when they identify the right opportunity, and Garrett would fit the profile of exactly the kind of addition their front office targets. Similarly, the Detroit Lions have built one of the most exciting rosters in the NFC over the past several seasons, with a culture and a coaching staff that has demonstrated the ability to develop players and compete at the highest level. Adding Garrett to that defensive infrastructure would address the one area where their ceiling might be limited, beyond any specific team fit. What is important to understand is the broader impact that Garrett's presence has on a roster beyond his individual statistics. When a player of his caliber lines up on your defensive front, the entire offense across the line of scrimmage has to change its approach. Double teams divert a second blocker away from his assignment, freeing interior defenders to create pressure from a different angle. Running backs are kept in for protection, removing receiving options from the quarterback's progression. Tight ends are assigned chip blocks before releasing into routes, disrupting the timing of passing concepts. All of these adjustments are responses to the threat Garrett represents, and all of them create advantages for the players next to him and behind him. His linebackers see cleaner gaps. His safeties see quarterbacks who are rushed and inaccurate. His cornerbacks benefit from incomplete passes that result from throws made under duress. The ripple effect of an elite pass rusher is one of the most powerful force multipliers in football, and Garrett generates it at a level that very few players in the history of the game have matched. There is also the dimension of Garrett's character and leadership that deserves serious attention when evaluating his potential impact on a new team. Accounts from inside the Browns organization consistently paint a picture of a player who approaches the game with rare dedication and professionalism. He studies film with the obsessiveness of a coach. He refines his technique with a precision that goes beyond what is required by natural talent. He holds himself to a standard that communicates to everyone around him what is expected, and he reinforces that standard through daily behavior rather than words. That kind of internal culture influence is extraordinarily difficult to acquire. You can draft physical tools. You can scheme around talent. You cannot manufacture the character of a player who genuinely leads by example, and Garrett has demonstrated that quality throughout his career. Championship rosters are built on a foundation of players who compete for each other, who hold each other accountable, and who refuse to accept anything less than maximum effort when the stakes are highest. Adding Garrett to a locker room that already has that competitive foundation would be synergistic. He would not just add defensive production. He would reinforce the culture of excellence that championship teams require, and his presence would raise the competitive standard for everyone on the roster simply by virtue of the way he operates every day. When this conversation ultimately resolves itself, whether through a trade or through Garrett remaining in Cleveland, it will serve as one of the defining moments in this chapter of NFL history. The league is at a competitive inflection point where the gap between genuine Super Bowl contenders and the rest of the field has compressed significantly. Several teams are within striking distance of a championship, and the margin between reaching the Super Bowl and falling short in the conference championship round is often determined by individual matchups on defense, by the presence or absence of a player who can change a game at the most critical moment. Garrett is that player. He is the kind of talent who tips those matchups, who creates the decisive play, who makes the difference when everything else is equal. For the Browns, this decision is about far more than one trade negotiation. It is about the long-term direction of the franchise and the obligations they carry toward both their star player and their fan base. If they move Garrett and acquire the assets necessary to accelerate a rebuild, they have the potential to construct a competitive roster within a few years. But that process requires patience and competence in equal measure, and Browns fans have earned the right to be skeptical of that promise given the franchise's history. What cannot be argued is that the status quo, holding Garrett while continuing to struggle at the quarterback position, serves nobody well. Least of all a player who has given everything he has to a franchise that has yet to give him a realistic chance to win. Wherever Myles Garrett ends up, one thing is beyond dispute. He has earned the right to compete for a Super Bowl. His production, his character, his leadership, and his relentless commitment to excellence over the course of his career have established him as one of the greatest defensive players of his generation. He came into the league as the number 1 overall pick and has exceeded every expectation attached to that billing. He has played through adversity, through team-level dysfunction, through the ups and downs that are inevitable across a multi-year career. And through all of it, he has remained a dominant, consistent, transformative force on a football field. That is not something that can be said about very many players. It is something that makes him genuinely special. The NFL trade market does not often produce opportunities of this magnitude. Franchise-altering defensive talents do not become available on a regular basis. And when they do, the teams willing to act decisively and aggressively are the ones that capitalize. This situation is going to develop quickly, and when it does, it will reshape the competitive landscape of the league in ways that reverberate for years. So the question is not simply whether the Browns should trade Myles Garrett. The question is which team has the vision, the assets, and the urgency to make the most aggressive move of this NFL era, and whether that team has what it takes to turn that acquisition into the championship that a player like Garrett has always deserved to chase.